And I'll explain. In most cases, this equipment must be certified all over the world by what we call approval agencies or regulators. And in this case, we were able to bring these individuals in that represented these firms, engineers, so they could participate and give their input to what they thought was important in certifying or testing it. So it really helped facilitate the outcome. When they adopted that standard to use, we didn't have this conflict that we would have had without it. If we didn't, then they would say, oh, we want to test it this way. And we said, well, this is how we do it. But what we could do then with the standard is have agreement, so when this was adopted by governments or the agencies, everything flowed and it made much more sense. So their participation was very important. And I should point out that in the United States, IEEE has been, it says this is our national standard that is to be tested to for these agencies. In Europe, it would be Senelec, and they have adopted a standard that's very much like it, said this is what you need to test to. But this gives us, so we can work together ahead of time as a community to get something that makes sense on everybody's level. Yeah. Okay. On our process, but I will try to answer the key points with respect to that. IEEE-SA, we have what we call an open process, which means anyone can join and participate in a working group. All they have to have is an interest. When this standard first came out, the primary stakeholders, or the people that had interest, were those that participated, namely the manufacturers and users and agencies. And I would have to say in 1985 or 83, environmental aspects were not that big a deal. What I want to point out, this is very important in this industry, is I mentioned steam and having it leak. And this is a big deal in environmental right now, because in all US facilities, you have to have, if you have a process unit, you have to have what's called water remediation, which means when it rains, you have to catch all the water that's running off and treat it, because it might have oil and things in it. It gets very complicated. And I could also point out, I came to China some time ago and was looking at the steam tracing, and they didn't even use a steam trap at some of these old plants. They just pinched the tube, and the water was running in the ground. I'm quite sure they're not doing that today because there's a care. So environmentally, things are much more awareness and sensitivity to that. And the other thing I'd like to point out, we talked about represent a consensus, and the other part of that is when we do a balloting process, it is open and anyone can ballot that. But we do have to have a balance there. There is a requirement for balance, so that you can't have just a bunch of manufacturers, shall we say, balloting and dictating what this is. There has to be balance between users and other entities so that we can assure that when this goes through, it is passed and people have had a chance to put input on it. So that's another area to get the consensus or get the balance we're talking about through the balloting process. So I think what we have here, again, I want to emphasize openness. So when a standard or working group is initiated, anyone that wants to have a say or participate in that can. And I could cite, not so much for 515, but I can point out right now that IEEE does have some standards for electronic equipment, and it's dealing with recycling and very much environmental issues on how you treat electrical components, what's in them and how you recycle them. And in that particular case, there is quite heavy involvement from people that would be doing recycling or EPA or other agencies. So they get together and decide how to do this. So that's going on as we talk. I hope that answers your question. That there's a couple different aspects to your question. First of all, I want to point out that the oil and what gets into the water and how that is treated and all that, that's done in the United States by the EPA. It's a government more decision there. The refineries, the users don't do that. This is established by government regulations, and it's a rule. Coming back to I think you've raised an important point, and I said the first document here that we came out with in 1983 was called a recommended practice. And what that means is this is recommended, but you don't really have to do it. But what I will point out, as the revisions of IEEE 515 evolved, it became a standard. We changed it to something that would then be official and have to be required. And in the United States, the government decides this is a national standard, or they establish it as a national standard, that products must be approved to this, and then they recognize who can test to it. And other places like Europe, it would be under the jurisdiction of Senelec that would dictate what standards are tested to. And in China, I've done business here, and it's an outfit, I believe, called CQST. I don't know quite what that stands for, CQST, but I've visited them, and they were the ones that were certifying electrical products in our business for use in China for these hazardous areas. And it's a place where you can't get to by plane very easily, and it's about a 6-hour drive, I think, from the nearest airport, out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. Okay. The only one I'm really familiar with was this one, and there are probably others, and let's hopefully hear today of what other effects. But this clearly, I can say, this standard did have a very large effect, and I know of some others in my arena. What we call IAS, and probably they don't have quite, I don't know the economic effect, but they clearly have a participation or regulatory effect by justifying that they can be used. And so I can't say what those other industries, how big their revenues are and all that, but without the standard, they would probably have difficulty really participating. So it's a good question, but I only can really speak for 515 because that's what I'm most familiar with.
A student can have this kind of question. You should answer this kind of question. What do you think?
I think, again, I'd go back, you have to look at them. And I don't want to steal the show from some of our other speakers here. We might have some other examples. Okay? Well, again, thank you very much and appreciate your questions.